there was no expectation that I was going to come out of it feeling a certain way, and maybe that's what helped. I don't know, but it did. And a year and a bit later, here I am, and I've lost 7 stone, 3 pounds.
It's insane.
It's insane.
Hello, Charlie.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Firstly, right, I call you Charlie.
Yep.
Everyone else that knows you calls you Charlotte.
Yep.
What do you prefer?
I don't mind either.
Okay.
I get Charlie, Charlotte, Shah.
Okay.
I get
'Cause I've
Shah
always-
quite a lot at work, so
Yeah.
I'm happy with either. I only changed my name to Charlie because there was, I think in my primary school there was 8 Charlottes in my class, and
That's a
going to
lot.
secondary school with that many Charlottes, I went, no, I'm going to be a Charlie. And then I went to secondary school and there was just as many Charlies, so it didn't really help. But
It didn't matter.
it didn't matter at all. But I don't mind any of them, so it doesn't bother me.
Okay. So first thing to address is your Luke's wife.
I am.
That look says a lot, doesn't it?
It says a lot.
How do you want to introduce yourself?
So obviously you know me through Luke. I've become friends with you through Luke. Me and Luke have been together for nearly 16 years now. Obviously I knew you from slightly earlier on than that. I think I was introduced to Rob first, obviously one of his oldest school friends, and then I met you slightly later. Before, I'm trying to think. No, you went travelling after we were married. So yeah, I knew you for a bit before our wedding.
I remember meeting you. I think the first time I met you was at the windmill at the pub.
Yes, yeah, Luke always used to take me there to meet people.
Yeah, that's a bit dodgy in itself.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was a dodgy pub, to be fair.
Yeah, it was good times. Back in the day.
Back in the day.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
So let's get those sort of questions out of the way first.
Yeah.
What is it like being married to Luke? Honestly,
it's a very big open question.
It is. You've listened to the podcast,
Yeah.
and you've listened to Luke bang on about lots of different stuff.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you've heard that you massively disagree with him, or is there anything that's kind of stuck in your head that you want to address?
No, I don't think so. I think Luke is notoriously known as being the clown of the group. I think there's no getting around that.
Yep.
He is the free-speaking, open-minded clown, and he's no different at home. He's always been the same. I've known Luke since primary school, and that's where me and Luke met. And his twin sister I've been friends with for a lot of that time as well. And then me and Luke reconnected when I was 17. He was 19. So yeah, I have known Luke a really long time. I've known him through a lot of different phases in his life. He was in a band when we first got together, so I've known that side of Luke, which is very different to the Luke now. That was very much we went to gigs. Our weekends consisted of gigs and band practices and, late nights round those groups of friends' houses. And then we've transitioned into the sensible Luke, if we can call him that now.
Sensible
Luke that we have now, which is the very career-driven, very, very sensible, important job.
Grown-up Luke.
Very grown-up Luke.
Nice.
Who now just runs and plays golf and is all into his fitness. So yes, I've seen a lot of transitions.
What's been your favourite version?
The band was my least favourite. He'll always, he knows that. And he always makes jokes that I made him quit the band. He always says that I was that partner that made him quit the band. That was my least favourite part. That was the part that he was when we first got together. So I went along with it at that time, but it was the most out of my comfort zone. I did not fit into that life whatsoever. Those gigs were very out of my comfort zone. It was not where I was comfortable.
What made you stick through that?
I don't know. I don't know. I look back now and I think I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe I was a starstruck 17-year-old who thought it was very, very cool. But when I look back now, I have no idea. I really don't. So no, I much prefer Luke in this stage of life.
Yeah.
Very much so, the sensible, grounded,
Yeah.
mature Luke.
I wonder what he would make of that.
Yeah, I wonder. He always jokes that I make him quit the band.
Yeah.
He gave up his lifelong passion of being a rock star.
Mm.
But, we all know that was a teenage fantasy.
Yeah.
And I helped pull him into the real world.
Mm.
So, yes, he is fun, lovable, extremely affectionate, not the side that everyone sees.
Mm.
He is very, very loving, very, very affectionate, a complete goofball still at the grand age of 35. So, but yeah, he's a lot of fun. He keeps me on my toes, that's for sure.
Good. What was your favourite version of you over that time with him?
Oh, definitely not 17-year-old me. No, definitely not. I look back to who I was at that beginning stage, and that was not my favourite part of me. I like the part of me now. There was, maybe early 20s, still not my favourite part. I mean, I've been in my job for 10 years now, and I've grown a lot during that time. I liked part of me where I made quite a lot, like my closest friend now, which was when I worked at the nursery before I worked in the job that I was at now. That part was fun, but that was very much going out, enjoying every weekend. Luke worked bar work at that time, so I had every Friday and Saturday night free. So me and my friends were always out. So that was good fun. But no, I would say the stage that I'm at now in my early 30s.
How would you describe that stage, or this stage now?
This stage now is the much less anxiety ridden version of myself.
Okay.
I have made no secret of the anxiety struggles that I've had throughout my life. They have been horrendous. But now I am in a much, much better place to be able to enjoy things a lot more, not stress about things as much, forward plan a bit better. I'm such a planner and an organizer. It's horrendous. And Luke's family always joke at how organized I am and how I can always forward plan and think about things. And I do like that part of myself, but not the anxiety that sometimes comes with it. But I'm much, much better now. I'm much happier.
Was that organised version of you driven by anxiety?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. But it wasn't like fun, enjoyable organising. It was awful. Whereas now I'm still organised, I'm still a forward planner, I'm still a control freak, but in a much, I would say, a better way, if there is a better way of being
What's
that type
changed
of person. For me, it would always be the hypnotherapy. Every version of myself since the hypnotherapy will always be the better version of myself.
Okay. So let's jump. I was going to save that till later, but let's jump into it. No, you're fine. So let's jump into that now. Okay. So, I don't even know how to start.
No.
So, I was training to be a hypnotherapist, which I am now. So, during my training, I had to use like case studies.
Yeah.
You was one of my case studies.
I was.
You explain it from your point of view. What was that like for you? What was your expectations going into it, if you had any? What were your kind of thoughts about hypnotherapy? What was your experience?
I think obviously when you were going through your training, I think you'd put up a couple of posts saying like, what, are you open-minded to hypnotherapy? What are your thoughts and feelings on hypnotherapy? And I think I'd commented saying, I'm not sure how I feel about it, or I don't really know what to expect from it. And I think that's when you reached out and said, well, be one of my test subjects, or can I do some training? And I was like, I have got nothing to lose. I was in a very, very, very bad place when you were going through your training. I'd been going through pretty intense counselling at that time. And I was in a place where I was like, well, I've got nothing to lose by trying it. Absolutely nothing to lose. So, of course, I said, absolutely. Happy to help if it's helping you with your studies. So we set up a couple of sessions. We had some of those like slightly smaller sessions, which were more, you asked whether I wanted like confidence building or stress relieving stuff. I always said stress relieving because obviously my stress and anxiety levels had always been really high. It'd always been something I'd really struggled with. So I always said that. And they were lovely. They were really, really nice. I came away feeling, oh, okay, nice and relaxed, really refreshed. And then I think you came over one day, you came to mine for a
Mm.
change instead of me coming to you. And you said, I want to try something new. Are you open for it? And
Mm-hmm.
I said, yep, absolutely. I had zero expectations. I didn't know what you were going to do. We went into it with no notes, no nothing. I had no idea
Mm.
what to expect from that session whatsoever. And I remember you starting the session and it was completely chaotic. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
laying there with my eyes closed like I always would, where usually you'd be trying to relax me into the session and you talked through it at 5,000 miles an hour. And I remember laying there really worried, like, oh, he's come, like I'm doing, he's come over to do a favor almost for me, because that's how it felt for me. You were doing
Okay.
me like a favor,
Yeah.
trying to help me. And I remember going, oh no, like he must be in a rush, like I've caught him on a bad day, like, oh, this is
Mm.
awful, like I feel really, really bad. And I thought you were like trying to hurry through it. And then I remember my mind was like whirling round and round and going absolutely mental. And then suddenly you like stopped it and it then completely slowed down. I remember my body like sinking and thinking, like I took this huge breath as if to say,
Mm.
oh, thank God, like that was awful. I remember my heart rate was like
Mm-hmm.
pounding, and then I remember like sinking into it, and then it just went really relaxed after that. And then you did the usual walking through, picturing a scenario. And I remember like getting to this like cliff edge. And I remember picturing all this stuff that you were
Mm.
telling me to picture. And I remember I was on this cliff edge and I had to float up, or I was looking at something up above, and I had to float up to this thing. And I remember you telling me to come back down onto the cliff edge. And I remember coming down, and then I don't remember a thing
Mm.
after that. And the next thing I remember was I think you were saying 2-1. I don't even know if I remember hearing 3 or it was 3-2-1, and telling me to wake up. And I remember going, oh, okay. And I remember like coming to so confused. And you just said like, what was the last thing you remember? And obviously I explained that
Yeah.
because that's what I can picture. I can picture this cliff. I can remember this cliff edge, and I can remember you telling me to go up and then come back down. And that's all I can remember. I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember a thing after that. And you went, oh, okay. Well, you've been gone for about 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't remember a thing. I could not tell you one word that you said to me during that time. And I've never been tempted to know either.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many people have said to me, oh, like, don't you want to know what he said? And I'm like, no, I kind of don't, because I don't want it for me to then know and have that then in my head,
Yeah.
because whatever it was that you said is in my brain.
Yeah.
It's in there
Yeah.
somewhere. I don't need to hear the actual words because my brain heard those words.
Yeah. It did. Yeah.
And then so I remember going, oh, okay. And when you left, you said like, let me know in a couple of days how you're feeling. And I was like, okay, I will. And I just thought, okay, well, that was really weird. And that
Mm.
was on the Friday. And then I remember by the Sunday, Luke had a race, of course. So me and Stephen had gone to watch the race. I think he was doing a 10K. And like, it was just a normal Sunday, gone to watch the race. And then came home. And I remember that evening just feeling really strange. I remember just scrolling through Instagram like I normally
Mm-hmm.
do. And Sophie, who you had on here
Mm-hmm.
before, her PT page came up, and I always used to like her posts and stuff because I went to school with Sophie, so
Yeah.
I always used to just like them, just to be supportive from a school friend point of view. And I remember feeling like really compelled to reach out to her, and I was like, why do I feel like that? That's really
Mm.
weird. I've never felt like that. And I thought, don't make any rash decisions, because you always do this and then you wake up in the morning and go, that was a stupid idea. Thank God you didn't do that. So I didn't. And I thought, I'll see how I feel in the morning. But I just remember feeling really weird.
Yeah.
And then I woke up in the morning and I was like, I still feel like I really want to message her. So I was like, I'm just going to do it. And I just did it, and I just messaged her, and we set up a phone call. And I didn't talk myself out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think, oh, what are you doing that for? And it got to I think it was the Wednesday I had the phone call with her. And I remember leaving work because I'm not allowed my phone on me at work. So I remember leaving work to go out to my car to have the phone call with her.
Yeah.
We had this really amazing phone call. And fine, it just didn't work out at that time for me, like just financially and stuff.
Yeah.
But what she was offering was so amazing. And I remember being so gutted by the end of that phone call going,
Yeah.
oh, that would have been perfect. Like, I'm really gutted that just financially just doesn't work out for us right now.
Yeah.
And bless her, she tried to throw me so many different options, but I was like, just financially, that's just,
Yeah.
it's just more than I can consider at the
Yeah.
moment. And I remember being really gutted. I went back into work and I was like, why am I so disappointed? It's so weird. Why do I feel so disappointed by that? And then I think I was driving home that day, and by this point, I hadn't said anything to Luke because I just thought this might just be like a fleeting feeling, and I don't
Mm.
want to get too carried away with this way that I'm suddenly feeling and
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And I think I told you, but I'd said don't say anything to Luke because he's going to get all excited and
He's always been quite skeptical as well, I think, of the
very skeptical,
hypnotherapy, which
very,
is,
very skeptical. And
yeah,
he says, "Oh no, I'm not," but he always was
he
skeptical,
was, yeah.
very skeptical of
Probably
it.
not so much now.
No, and I think a lot less people are skeptical now
Mm.
after me. But I think I'd said to you, I don't know why, but I felt compelled to do a couple of things, and I don't know why I'm feeling like that, but I'm just rolling with it. And then I remember like just calling up the gym and booking an induction. I was like, I don't know why I want to do this, but I do. I mean, obviously, just to preface where I was at that stage, I was in a really, really, really bad place, but I had put on the most weight that I'd ever put on in my life. And I was very unhealthy. I was
Mm-hmm.
not in a very good way. Um, I had put on a lot of weight and I was just eating my feelings at that point. There was no other
Yeah.
way of describing it. I was just eating feelings because I didn't know how to cope with how I was feeling at that time. And all I'd ever done, the only way I'd ever coped with anything was just to eat. But it had got really bad.
Mm.
So, so yeah. So then I booked a gym induction. And then I remember going food shopping that week and suddenly wanting to pick different things. And I was like, why am I doing this? Like, where's the chocolate that I've usually been eating? Where's this and where's that? And it just completely snowballed from there. It was just so bizarre. And I think I did tell Luke by the end of that week because I had to tell him that I was going to this gym
Yeah.
induction. And I said, look, I don't want you to get too weird because obviously he's so fitness fanatic. He's
Yeah.
so health conscious, but he's so into his fitness and everything. I was like, I don't want you to get too giddy with excitement about this. And I don't know why I'm feeling this way. I have no idea. Because at this point I didn't know what type of hypnotherapy he'd done. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
why I was feeling like this after pretty much one session. And I do ascertain now, like when I talk to people and a lot of people ask me about the hypnotherapy, I do, because a lot of people say to me, oh, well, how many sessions did it take for you to work? And I feel bad by saying, well, really, it was one really good session. But I said, I like to tell people that I was going into it with absolutely no expectations. I
Mm-hmm.
knew nothing about what to expect. You had basically turned up at my door and said, can I try something new? I had zero expectations. I wasn't expecting to feel a certain way or
Mm-hmm.
to have any sort of outcome from it. So ultimately, I didn't. I think when people go into counseling and hypnotherapy wanting an outcome,
Yeah.
then it's harder, I think. I had no expectations. There was no part of me that was like, I want to feel better or I want to do this. I didn't care at that point. Like I wasn't interested in making myself feel better
Mm.
because I was in a very much a self-wallowing, I feel rubbish, I feel depressed
Yeah.
stage of my life. So there was no expectation that I was going to come out of it feeling a certain way, and maybe that's what helped. I don't
Mm.
know. But it did, and a year and a bit later, here I am, and I've lost 7 stone, 3 pounds.
It's insane.
It's insane when I think about it. It's absolutely insane. The confidence that I have had through so many things. Like I go to, I weight train, which is mental because I go, I've never weight trained in my life. I've never picked
Mm-hmm.
up a weight in my life. And, I started off in the least scary part of the gym, and then I liked some of the look of some of the machines, and just each time I went, I had confidence to go, I've watched someone do that, I'm going to go
Hmm.
try it. And then I went round to the free weights room and I was like, I watched videos and I was like, I can do that workout. And I would then try those workouts. And
Mm.
then before I knew it, I ended up in the really scary weights room with, all the men where the bit where the women don't feel comfortable to go. And I was like, no, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do my workout. And now that's the only place I go in the gym, and then I started running, which is mental because I don't run. I'm not a runner.
Do now.
I do now, which is crazy. I'm asthmatic and that's not easy and I hate it. And but I love the feeling that I get from it. But I think, on top of all of that, I did a 5K race last year, which was mad. And I never ever dreamed that I could have ever have achieved anything like that because I've never been that type of person. I was always the book nerd at school. I liked
Hmm.
school. I liked studying. I didn't, I skipped PE if I could, I didn't hated all of those things. And now suddenly I've got this like newfound confidence to try things, and I've set myself a new goal for this year that I want to run a 10K race, which is, what I'm now trying to work towards, which again is mad. And, I've got plans for next year depending on how my weight training and stuff goes this year, and there's events that I'd like to do. But it's, the weight has been a byproduct of everything else.
Mm.
The weight was not something I ever dreamed could have ever happened because I have yo-yo dieted my entire life. I've done every fad toxic diet known to
Mm.
mankind and they've never worked because they're not good, they're bad.
Mm.
And I've done so much research to do it properly this time, but that's all been a byproduct of how much different I feel. And I have never felt like this, in my 33 years of life. I have
Mm.
never felt this content or this to have the ability to say, I can't believe I did that. How proud I am of myself and stupid
Mm.
things like that. Because yeah, it's the weight's been lovely. And of course, the compliments that come with that are nice, but just feeling better in myself, being able to, one of my non scale victories was to be able to walk into a high street shop and buy clothes because I haven't been able
Mhm.
to do that since, like my early 20s. And that seems ridiculous to so many people. But to me, it was a
Mm.
huge deal to be able to walk into Primark and buy a pair of pajamas that I loved and, stupid things like that. And
It's certainly not stupid.
it's not stupid, but even to go to Disneyland and not panic about the rides that I was going on, or that embarrassment of getting onto a ride and not being able to fit in it
Yeah.
properly, and all those little things that people don't realize when they've never struggled with their weight or their
Mm.
confidence or anything, and being able to, yeah, I've, becoming more confident at work. And, I was so anxiety ridden at work that it got so bad that, I would triple check every single bit of work that I did because I was so paranoid and scared that I was going to make a mistake or
Yeah.
get something wrong. And I would make myself sick over it. Like before I went on to annual leave, I would look at every possible thing that someone could check while I was away to make sure that I
Mm.
hadn't made a mistake so that I couldn't be in trouble when I got back. And, all of that side of things. Now I have the confidence to go, no, the advice I'm giving out is correct. I know I'm doing my work correctly. I don't need to check something
Mm.
before I have a day off because I know what I'm doing is correct.
At what point did that confidence come? When did you realize, oh, this is confidence? If that makes
I
sense.
don't think that would be straight away because I think at the beginning, I think I was so overridden by the weight coming off
Mm.
and my gym habits changing and my lifestyle changing that I don't think a lot of the work stuff or the confidence in my life didn't come until much later on
Mm.
in last year before I realized, oh, actually, this is all becoming much easier.
Mm.
So many things in my life are becoming easier than they ever used to be because everything used to be so difficult because I made it mentally difficult.
Yeah.
Not because it was difficult, but because I made it so difficult. And I suddenly, I was able to walk away from work on a Thursday or a Friday and go, yep, I can switch off or I can relax over the weekend. Or, when I would give advice out to someone, I didn't have to then, they would walk away and then I would second guess everything that I'd said to them, or I'd be checking every policy or asking my senior person for their advice just to make sure I'd given out the right advice.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't do that now. And I think that did come much later because I then realized, I think it took a while before I realized it was confidence that I was then getting, because I do just think the weight and everything overrid everything at the beginning, because that was such a huge shift in my
Mm.
life, but also all of our lives. Like Luke was so used to being able to just go for a run and go to the
Mm.
gym 7 nights a week if he wanted to, because I stayed indoors and didn't go anywhere and didn't do anything. And then suddenly I started being like, well, I'm going to the gym tonight.
Mm.
Or actually, I'm going to go get my hair cut, because I hadn't got my hair cut in 2 years because I just didn't care. I didn't care
Mhm.
about how I looked. I didn't care about my appearance. I didn't care about anything. So I just stopped going to the hairdressers.
Mm.
Um, I hated the way my hair looked. I hated I hate the colour of it. I just didn't like anything. And then suddenly I was like, I'm going to go get my hair cut and coloured. I'd got an
Mm.
amazing recommendation from a friend. And now I have the most amazing hairdresser and I love her. Um, but to then have the confidence to go, I left and went, I'm going to book my next appointment. And now I book regular appointments. I treat myself to things. Now can say to Luke, I need a day on my own.
Mm.
Or, I'm a very introverted person who likes their own space and their own time. And now I have the confidence to say, I'm tired and I need a day on my own, which before I would never do, because
Mm.
Luke would go out. Luke would go to golf. Luke would go for a run. Luke would go to the gym.
Mm.
And because I didn't care, I just stayed indoors with Stephen because it was all I could do.
Yeah.
I had no hobbies. I had no interests. Whereas, once the gym became part of my life, I was like, well, no, I want to go to the gym. So our whole routine had to completely shift to fit that in,
Mm.
you know. So that's been a big adjustment, but it's me being able to go, no, it's time for me to prioritize myself,
Mhm.
because I hadn't done that for such a long time, especially since having Stephen. I just threw
Yeah.
myself into him, and nothing else mattered. But I was then able to go, no, this is important, and I do need that space. And now I do that, and don't feel guilty for saying
Mm.
that either. So I think it's, the hypnotherapy hasn't just changed one aspect of my life, it has changed every aspect of my life, but also the life that my family got used to leading as well.
Yeah.
It was an adjustment for Stephen because he was so used to me being available and being there. So that was unusual, and
Yeah.
he had to get used to that as well. But it was also important to go, well, go spend time with,
Mm.
your dad instead of it always just being me. Mummy's going to go off and do this, and now you're going to do this
Mm.
with daddy, and that's nice, and that's important for you to do that too. So
Yeah.
it overhauled our lives completely.
As is kind of part of my next question. Really, was that how or what impact has that had on your roles? I guess obviously this is
Yeah,
all about like the roles we play and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
But how has that change and that shift impacted on you as like a mum, as a wife, as
It's completely changed everything, but for the better.
mm.
You know, just because I was so accessible to Stephen doesn't mean that I was the best version of being a mum that I could
Mm.
be, because far from it. I was, getting increasingly unhappier. I was always known for being the mum that made so many plans and took Stephen to so many places and did so many things. And then, the more depressed and unhappy I got, the less I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
So then the more time we would spend indoors, and that wasn't good for either of us, because, he liked getting outside and so did I, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to do any of those things. So the hypnotherapy is, he's seen me now become happier, more active, and it's encouraged him as well. He came out for his first 5K run with me and Luke at the
Mm.
weekend, which was amazing, because he'd seen us go and do it and was like, well, I want to be a part of that.
Mm.
He's 6, bless him. He wasn't expecting him to just go out there and run 5K, but he gave it his best shot, love him. And he did it. He
Mm.
finished. And the little smile on his face when we all set off, he was so happy and excited to be a part of it. And that's lovely that then, you've become a different role model than I was
Mm.
before, and that's all completely changed. He's used to seeing Luke being active, but Stephen's not a part of that. He doesn't get to be
Yeah.
involved in that. And now he says to me all the time, I want to come to the gym when I'm old enough. Can you ask him how old I have to be to come?
Mm.
Because, he wants to do all those things now, and that's really sweet and lovely. Um, but he's now getting a much better version of me. I now have the energy to want to go out and do things. We go
Mm.
for long walks or big bike ride, family bike rides, because I actually have the energy to do it.
Mm.
Whereas before, I didn't have the energy to do those things. I would be walking and carrying the bags while him and Luke ran off and did things.
Mm.
Whereas, now instead of, oh, daddy, come catch me or come race me, I can go and do that now. And
Mm.
I'd race him and say, come on, who can get to tree first? And because I could never do that before. So that's really nice. And that's so completely different. And, I think for Luke, that's got to be nicer as well. He enjoys seeing me happier. Luke's seen me at so many different stages of my life. Obviously, when I was 17, I was completely different and
Mhm.
was a completely different person. But for him, it's got to be nicer to see me happier and more active and just happy with who I am as a person and how I feel when I go out, and that I want to get dressed up and I want to do my hair and I want to make an effort now. That that's got to be nice. Not that he cares. He don't care if I'm in my pajamas or if I'm dressed up going out, but it's nicer for him to see me happy
Mm.
and doing more, which is nice. And obviously he enjoys the fact that we can go, you know, run together or go gym together. Me and Luke have a bit of time on our own now and we go to the gym together, and that's nice and that makes a change. Or, we had a bit of time yesterday because Stephen went out with a family member. So we went for a 6K walk around St. Mary's Island. Whereas before I would have gone, I don't want to go out. I
Mm.
would have sat indoors. His undiagnosed ADHD brain would have taken over. He would have ended up going outside, or he would have gone up to a gym, or he'd have gone for a run, and we wouldn't have actually spent
Yeah.
any time together. So that's nicer for us now because we've got more similar interests. So yeah, it has. It's changed everything.
How proud are you of yourself?
Oh, immensely. And I never said that before because I wasn't, silly as it sounds, I didn't feel proud of myself or anything. But now I openly say that, losing over 7 stone in weight is unimaginable for one person to have done completely on their own, without the hypnotherapy I call my catalyst, but without
Mm.
help or guidance while I've been doing it. I have done it completely on my own. There's been, I've asked for help and guidance along the way from Luke or whatever, maybe, but I've been the person that's shown up for those workouts every single day. I'm the person that has religiously stuck to eating a certain way or
Mm.
overhauling my diet and my life. And I'm the person that has not made excuses not to go to the gym, or if I made an excuse one day, I've shown up the next day. I have religiously dedicated myself to that lifestyle. So yeah, I am immensely proud of myself
Mm.
because I have never stuck to anything in my life the way I've stuck to this. But it doesn't feel like, you know, it's a generational thing. But I've had older people say to me, "Oh, so when are you stopping then?" I'm like, "Stopping what? Like,
Mm.
this isn't a diet that when I reach a goal weight that then it all stops and I miraculously go back to normal." I said, "This is life now. This isn't a diet plan that I'm on. This
Mhm.
is just how I'm now living my life." And I can be very normal and I could go out for dinners and we can have social gatherings and that's all very normal and lovely. But I know what to do around that to keep me a certain way. And that's just life now. I said, it's not a diet plan. This is
A
just
lifestyle.
how I lead my life now, and that's taken a lot of brain change. I don't know how else to word that. Like I've had to break years of living life a certain way to now
Mm.
change it to be this way. I've had to break years of diet culture in my brain to live my life this way, and that has not been easy by any means.
In what way?
You know, I've yo-yo dieted since I was a teenager. I've
Hmm.
grown up in a toxic diet culture my entire life where I have not ever had stability around how to eat and what's good to put in my body and what's not.
Mm.
I've never been taught properly how to be nutritious in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, that has led to a downward spiral throughout my entire teens and my 20s, where obviously I have lent on food as my emotional regulation for
Yeah.
almost my entire life. I've never known any other way of dealing with any type of emotion, whether that be happy, sad,
Mm.
angry, whatever it may be. I have felt a certain way and I have eaten to compensate for that. Um, and trying to break that now is, you know, I've achieved each milestone not by getting a takeaway to celebrate, but by going out and buying myself something new,
Mm.
you know, treating myself to something that isn't food related, because I have the ability to have a food treat whenever I want. It doesn't need to be as a reward for something.
Hmm.
And that is what I've had to break because I have spent my life rewarding myself for food, with food.
Mm.
Whereas now it's like, no, I'm going to go get my nails done, or I'm going to go buy myself a new pair of pajamas,
Mm.
or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go to a cinema and go treat myself and go to a cinema. And it's learning to reward myself in different ways
Mm.
because that's not how I've lived my life.
Is that so? Is that like talking about rewards? What about the days where you do emotionally struggle? What do they look like now?
I would say now, don't get me wrong, I mean, I have suffered with binge eating probably most of my like my adult life since I was like a late teenager
Yeah.
through to the hypnotherapy. Binge eating has been my way of dealing with everything.
Mm.
And I can safely say, hand on heart, that since I've had the hypnotherapy, I have stopped binge eating, which is huge.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that I haven't felt like I've overindulged, but then when I look at that overindulgence and I compare it to what my overindulgence used to be, I have to give my head a wobble and say, you eating that was not overindulgence. It felt like a lot because it's more than what your body is currently
Mm.
used to, but it was far from an overindulgence. You know, what used to consume compared to what I consume now is minuscule. It's ridiculous. Um, so, you know, there may be a time where I go, I just want a bar of chocolate, but that bar of chocolate will now be a small bar of chocolate as opposed to a family size bar of
Mm.
chocolate or two or three or whatever that may have been. Um, but I definitely don't emotionally regulate with food anymore. I I would now I would if you know, since challenging things have come up, I would now go to gym
Yeah.
because I can find a great release from that now, and the endorphins that that now gives me is completely different.
Mm.
You know, food is always a short, sharp fix, and then you feel like crap afterwards. Whereas you don't get that feeling when you go to a gym. I'm not quite at that stage with running yet. I know people would go for like a
Hmm.
long run, and I'm not at that stage yet. Running still, I'm still panicking. I'm gonna have an asthma attack the whole way around. So I'm not at that stage with running yet, but I do feel good afterwards. But I think for me, it's mainly the gym now. Or I would very much say, I need a day on my own, or
Mm.
I just need 5 minutes on my own. I think Luke picks up on them cues a lot better now,
Mm.
and will go, okay, do what you need to do, go out, do this, do that, or I'll take Stephen here and you have five
Mm.
minutes. Or I'm better at saying now, I'm not coming. You go and do that, and I'm
Mm.
not coming to that.
You said Luke picks up on those cues a little bit better now.
Yeah.
What's changed that?
Probably the way I communicate it.
Okay.
I think where before the hypnotherapy and before my counselling as well, I never spoke out loud about how I felt. No one
Mm,
knew the true extent of how bad I had got. Not even my best friend, I don't think I disclosed just how bad I had got. Her maybe more so than anyone else, but still not the full extent.
yeah.
Whereas I think since the hypnotherapy, I am better at saying I've had enough, or I've reached my limit.
Mm,
I need some time on my own, or it has been forever since I have done something for myself, excluding the gym, but just having like a day on my own, or at least
mm,
half a day on my own. And I'm now better at saying, can you go out and do something? Because I just want to do this. Or, even with work, I've booked myself a random day off just to have a day on my own, which ordinarily, the guilt would have been, well, I can't take leave if I'm not doing something with Stephen.
mm,
Whereas now I'm better at going, well, yes, you can. You absolutely can do that.
mm.
And now I will do that, and I will take a day for myself. Um, so, yeah, I think it's maybe more how I communicate it is probably better, maybe more so than him picking up on it.
Um, one of the biggest things I know is has happened in recent years is obviously the loss of your dad.
Hmm.
Um, I lost my mum 6, 7 months after you lost your
Yeah,
dad.
it was quite close.
Yeah, it was January, so it was
Yeah,
only recently the anniversary, wasn't it? And I
yeah.
lost my mum in the August. So to bring the mood down, I guess. What was that time like? If you want to talk, you don't obviously
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
talk about it, but what was that grief, or is that grief? I know it's a never-ending thing, isn't it? Grief.
Yeah.
What's that? What was that grief like for you then, and what is that grief like for you now?
Losing him was, beyond earth shattering. It's, not something you ever prepare for, not especially not, at the age that we're at.
Mm,
You always think about losing your parents when you're, well into your 60s, hopefully, if you're lucky, 50s, 60s, if you're lucky. But losing someone when you've just turned 30
mm,
is it's just, yeah, it's not something you ever prepare for, especially not when they'd never displayed any health problems. Dad had had a few, bits and bobs over the years, but nothing as catastrophic as the cancer that killed him. And it was, we didn't get any closure with Dad's. It was cancer of unknown primary, which is not a cancer I'd ever
mm,
heard of prior to him
mm,
dying. And it wasn't very well known. He was tested for every cancer under the sun because they just didn't know what it was. It was a great big tumor under his arm that, started off as a potential abscess, which is what the doctors thought, and they treated it as
mm,
such until they biopsied it and found cancerous cells, but never found the actual primary cancer. So they
mm,
could never treat it. He had a course of chemotherapy, which was the closest that they could guess. And that just made him worse. He ended up with neutropenic sepsis, and he was so unbelievably poorly. And they stopped that immediately because it made him
mm,
even worse. They did preventative radiotherapy, and that just made the tumor even worse. It was horrendous. Again, probably one of the worst things they could have done for it. It made the tumor 10 times worse than it was before, but it was the risk that it was going to spread even further and start going over into his lungs, where his lung might have collapsed. There was so many things, and you get why they make the decisions. You'd rather them try things than not try anything at all. But yeah, it was awful. It was absolutely horrendous, so undignified. And for my dad, who was a very much a prim and proper, liked his appearance, very much looked after himself, cared about the way that he was. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And it was just so quick. And yeah, it was horrendous. And he died at the beginning of January, and I took some time off work, which I'm, immensely grateful that I did. I made eternity, I never look back on that decision and think I made the wrong decision. I'm so pleased that I took that time off. But I did spend most of that month with my mum, and I obviously had to, help mum with paperwork and his funeral arrangements and, anything I could to help really, because that's not something that anyone should be doing on their own. So I did, I threw myself into helping because it's the only thing I know how to do. I just want to fix things and whatever. But I didn't, when I look back now, I don't think I took much time for my own grief during that period because I, at the beginning, I had the immense help of Luke's auntie, who has always been Stephen's primary childcare, and she was incredible. But then it got to the point where I was like, I can't keep relying on you when I'm not at work. I need to, be available as well. So Stephen was at preschool during that time, so I would get up in the morning, drop Stephen at preschool, go to my mum's, do whatever I could during the day at my mum's. Everything that comes with, organising when someone dies. And then I would pick Stephen up at 3 o'clock and then go home with Stephen. So there was absolutely no wriggle room in there for, just time to reflect or just sit on what had happened, really. And then we had his funeral quite late. It took so long to get everything through, and we didn't have his funeral until later on in like middle of February, like beginning
16th
to
it was.
middle.
It was my birthday. You at the funeral.
Yes, of course it was. Yeah, yes, I remember. Yeah, of course. And that, yeah, it took so long to organise all of that. So there was a little bit. There was a little. I think it was like a week before the funeral where me and mum had done most of the organising. There wasn't much more that we could do. Most of the paperwork had been sorted, with like financial paperwork and things like that. So I think I got maybe a week where there was a bit less for me to go over there and do. And she kind of said, look, you don't need to be here now. There isn't much more we can do now. So I think I would then drop Stephen at preschool and have just a bit of time. But that made it harder to think about going back to work because I'd had, nearly 6 weeks off by that point. And that's the longest amount of time I've ever taken off of work. But I don't regret it. I don't regret it at all. It was important. And ultimately, mum needed that support a little bit too. As much as, of course, she would have coped on her own. I don't think she should have had to. So I'm pleased that I was able to be available to help her through a lot of that. And then I went back. I think the funeral was on a Thursday, and I think I went back on to work on the Monday. What I'm very grateful for is the fact that where I work, my dad worked too. So the funeral was unbelievable. It was, we had about 200 people, a huge presence from my workplace, but the prison service in general. And what was so comforting was having so many people that I worked with there. So many people that I had to go back to work and see the next week who were fundamental parts of that funeral, which was for me made going back to work so much easier because it wasn't like I was walking back into a workplace where, oh, your dad had just died and now you're coming back to work. I had so many of his friends at my workplace. My deputy governor was one of dad's closest friends. Someone else that I work with, like, we've known each other since we were children and our dads were best friends. So, I had him as, there were so many people in my workplace that I walked back in and it wasn't, they knew.
Yeah.
They knew how I was going to be feeling. They knew, all of that, which made it a lot easier to go back to work. Not easy, but easier. And especially in my role, I was sitting at home kind of contemplating when I was going back and going, my job is, I'm a HR manager. How do I deal with everyone's in my opinion, minuscule little problems
Hmm.
when I'm going through the worst grief I've ever been through in my life, you know. And, you know, I'm no stranger to grief. I've lost, you know, people in my life. So it's not like this was my first experience of grief. I'd lost my cousin when I was quite young, when she was quite young, I was quite
Mm.
young. You know, I've lost grandparents and things like that. You know, I've been to plenty of funerals. It's not as if I was a stranger to losing
Yeah.
someone, but someone's so instrumental in your life, you can't prepare for it. It's a completely different feeling. Not like no grief I've ever experienced before. Um, yeah, and it was that struggle of going, how am I gonna, you know, have a member of staff come into me and talk about their problems when ultimately I don't care when I'm
Mm.
feeling the way I'm feeling. And that's really difficult when it's your job and you have to care and you have to be a certain way. And, you know, it was difficult to think about going back to work and being so normal because ultimately, as sad as it is, you're going back to work and life has to carry on.
Mm.
You know, I've got loads of wonderful photos of my dad on my desk at work and, you know, my dad and Stephen and stuff. And that helped because then as people came in, they would, you know, people came to my desk and people who knew dad, they would go, oh, like, isn't that lovely? Like, how are you doing? And it would
Yeah.
be a topic of conversation and that would help in a way.
Mm.
But it also gave me an opening to talk about him because I talk about him all the time. And I love that with work because I can talk about him all the time
Mm.
because there are so many people who want to talk to me about him, which is lovely. Unfortunately, I didn't cope with it very well afterwards. And, I don't think there was any particular reason for that other than it was just crap and I just didn't cope with it.
Mm.
And I did obviously spiral, you know, the 0 to 1 years, I think I just spent in complete denial.
Yeah.
I don't think I came out of denial. And I found 1 to 2 worse. 2 to 3 is where I went into counselling
Mm.
and then had the hypnotherapy. So I did 9 months of private counselling, which, you know, I paid for myself um, because I didn't like me and Luke didn't really know where else to turn. And then obviously I had the hypnotherapy, which is what changed everything. But I found 1 to 2 years the hardest.
What was the hardest about that period?
I think at 1 to 2 years you come out of denial. I think it's somewhere within that time period I came out of denial. Not everyone, obviously, but I came out of
Mm.
denial. And I think once you come out of denial and you go into acceptance, that's just crappier. I think
Mm.
denial's hard, but you still have that brief moment of going, oh, they could still be alive. Or your brain just not forgets, that's not the right word, but it doesn't, you still have moments where you
Yeah.
go, they're still here.
Yeah. I think I found, yeah, that obviously that first year is so full of many firsts.
Yeah.
It's almost like you can't quite catch your breath
Mm.
with it all, the anniversaries and this time last year and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think the 1 to 2, between 1 and 2, I think it does shift because they're not firsts anymore.
No.
And I think it's that feeling of, for me, anyway, I can only speak for myself, but it's that feeling of the world is carrying on around you, but you feel stuck.
Yeah.
You're kind of just sitting there watching everything and go past, and that, like, my mum, was one of the centers of my world, and that feeling doesn't go away, and that realization that she's not the center of anyone else's world. I think that's hard. I think that's, for me, yeah, that, I think, where that year in particular was the hardest.
Mm.
I'm not quite sure what to make of the year that just it's just gone. Well, I'm still in that. I've got, third anniversary in August.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but again, it's like even now, expecting another baby imminently. Um, Thinking about all of those things of yeah, it's that grieving the life that should have been. Um, where there's other sort of life events that happen, and you just think they're not here.
Mm.
They're not here to celebrate those kind of things. I think that's where the grief lingers. I don't know what
Yeah,
that's like for you.
100%. Yeah, I think obviously the difference with us is Stephen was a little bit older.
Mm,
So I had a lot of Stephen's grief to cope with at the same
mm,
time. And that was really, really hard because I had a 4-year-old who couldn't understand where their granddad had gone, And, there's a lot of times where we had nights where Stephen would come downstairs crying his eyes
mm,
out because he used to say, I miss my granddad, or I can't believe my granddad's gone. And I have to deal and me and Luke dealt with those moments completely on our own because there's no way we wanted to burden anyone else because that's horrible,
yeah.
and we dealt with those moments completely on our own. And, even now, Stephen's nearly 7 and we've just had the 3-year anniversary. And even now, Stephen cannot still wrap his head around the fact that
Mm,
Dad's not here. For Christmas, he got a moonlight for his bedroom because, me and Luke aren't religious, so we didn't want to confuse the whole
mm,
heaven situation because um, I don't know how to explain that because we're not religious. But we said that Dad went to the moon and the stars, and that's now really symbolic within our family. The moon and the stars. It's a very, very big thing.
mm,
And so for Christmas this year, we bought Stephen a moonlight for his bedroom, and it changes to the phases of the moon depending on what day it is. So now every day he'll ask us what phase of the moon it's in, but it's a topic of conversation to talk about Dad.
yeah.
Um, and even now he'll make comments and go, "Oh, I wish I could just open that up so I could go in there and see Granddad."
Mm,
He's got his teddy, which my brother bought him not long after my dad died, which has got my dad's voice in it. My dad had sent Stephen a voice note while he was in hospital, and we took a section out of that, and Stephen has that in his teddy. And that first year when my dad died, that 0 to 1, Stephen pressed that teddy so much that he
mm,
wore the voice box out. He would lay there at night. So he just turned 4 just after Dad died. So Dad just missed his birthday. And Stephen would literally press that teddy continuously, and that's how he would fall asleep. Which, in that 0 to 1, I used to stand there and stroke Stephen's hair and just cry,
mm,
just cry while he fell asleep every single night. And you didn't want to say to him, God, please stop pressing that teddy because that's killing me, because that brought him comfort and that's all that mattered. So we just allowed him to do that. And, he takes that teddy everywhere with him. If he
mm,
goes somewhere, that teddy goes with him. Um, and he will still press that voice box
mm,
continuously to hear my dad's voice. And like I said, he wore that voice box out, and I went and got the voice box changed and put back in. And well, we did it as one of the elf's surprises one morning during
mm,
Christmas. And he always talks about it. He says, "Oh, my elf buddy went and put Granddad's voice back in my teddy for me," and he loves that.
mm,
And that was a really great thing. But that teddy has brought Stephen immense comfort. But Stephen can still remember my dad so vividly.
mm,
He looks at photos and videos of my dad continuously, and we've got one of those photo frames in the lounge with photos and videos on it, and they'll come up with a video, and he'll go, "Oh, I remember that. I remember Granddad doing that," or "Granddad said this and Granddad did that."
mm,
And I don't know how much of that is through picture and video memory. Stephen's got an amazing memory for things.
Mm.
Kids just have this innate ability just to remember minute details. So I don't know how much of that is actually his genuine memory, but he does have that memory of my dad, which is wonderful.
Mm.
And I'm so glad 3 years later he still has those memories, and that's lovely. And I never want him to lose that, which is why I will continuously show him videos and photos of my dad.
Yeah.
The times where he comes down upset are becoming less and less. But they do still happen. It still happened the back
Mm.
end of last year, and he will still come downstairs bawling his eyes out, and he can't sleep, and it's because of my dad. And yeah, that is really hard to deal with. It's really hard, and you can't help but have really bitter moments in grief and go, why my dad? Or, your dad's like 20 years older than my dad. What,
Mm.
with anyone that you meet in life,
Yeah.
or you meet older people and they've still got their parents, and you think, God, how fucking lucky are you? Like,
Mm.
you're in your 50s and both your parents are still alive. Like, isn't that incredible? Like, how lucky are you? And you can't help but have those bitter moments towards people, and it's not nice, but you think it internally, you don't say out loud.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's hard not to think that way sometimes. But equally, you don't ever wish anyone to have gone through what you went through, and you are so grateful for those people for still having their parents and whatever, and that's
Mm.
lovely, and you're so pleased for them. But I think my heart always breaks for Stephen more so than myself sometimes, because he just adored my dad.
Mm.
My dad was, one of those people that was close to the center of his universe. My dad was such a fun, amazing grandparent that, my heart breaks for Stephen in that respect as well. I'm thinking, oh, you haven't got that now, and that's so sad.
Mm.
But yeah, 0 to 1, denial, 1 to 2, horrendous. Definitely the worst. And I went into that second year in the worst place I have ever, ever,
Yeah.
ever been in. I can't even explain how horrendous I was that January. January is just a bad month anyway, let alone when you throw your dad's anniversary at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
of it. But yeah, I was in a bad way. I had stopped coming home from work. I was driving around just avoiding coming home because I just didn't want to. I didn't want to face up to any sort of responsibility that I would have to deal with at home. I didn't want to have to put on a front or pretend to be a certain way. I'd spent all day doing that at
Yeah.
work. I had to mask every single day at work. I used to leave my house in the morning and I would drive in complete
Mm.
silence. I didn't put the radio on, I didn't do anything. I just drove in complete silence. I would sometimes cry the whole way, sometimes I wouldn't. And then I would get to work, put on a complete front, do my job, because my job is so peoply. I'm not sure what mistake I made, but it's so peoply, my job. For a really introverted person, it's so peoply.
Mm.
And I would just have to mask so much at work. And then, it got to the end of the day and I was so exhausted,
Mm.
so tired. And then the thought of then I had to come home and, you know, not be in a mood, even though all I wanted to do was just be in a mood.
Yeah.
But I couldn't, because Luke was going to divorce me at that point if I stayed in that mood any longer. I don't know how he put up with me for as long as he did in the mood that I was in. But I was so horrendous. I was so miserable. And then I didn't want to parent.
Mm.
Because I didn't want to be a mum. I didn't want to be I wasn't a fun mum at that point. I'd, stopped making fun plans. I never took Stephen out to places because the effort of it, I just couldn't be bothered. It was
Mm.
awful. So I just avoided it. I either stayed at work late, or I would leave work and I'd text Luke and say, I just need time, and I wouldn't come home for a
Yeah.
bit. I just drove around, or I just went to places and secretly ate because I didn't know what else to do. And I just stopped coming home, or I would get home and be like, I'm going out, or just whatever it may be. It was
Yeah.
just awful. It was horrendous. And that's when Luke said, I don't, I think one night I'd left work and said, I'm not coming straight home. And he said, I have reached out to counselling because I don't know what else to do. I think he'd come to you for
Yeah, he spoke to me about
for
some
some like
recommendations.
recommendations of people. Because it just got to a point where he didn't know what to do anymore. No one could help me. No one could make anything better. And he said, look, there's someone that's going to call you at this date. If you don't want to talk to him, then don't. But I don't know what else to do. And I remember being so angry. I remember because I wouldn't talk to him on the phone. When I texted him when I'd left work that day, I think it must have been a bit of a turning point. And I texted him and said, I'm not coming home. And he tried to call me and I just ignored the call. I was like, I can't talk on the phone because I'm just going to cry. So I didn't answer the phone. He tried to call me a few times. Obviously, he must have been worried, but I just didn't answer the phone. I think I might have done maybe on the last call because I thought I need to just reassure him that I am okay. And he said, that's when he said, about the counselling. And I just remember saying, okay, and just put the phone down. I just remember bursting into tears because I hadn't wanted to admit that it got to that point.
Yeah.
I'd resisted counselling for such a long time. I don't know why, but I had just resisted it for such a long time. I took the call and obviously she had to because obviously Luke had reached out, she had to confirm that I did actually want to go ahead with it. And she was lovely. I was very lucky. We clicked really well. She was quite local, which was nice. She was lovely. She was just so nice. And, it gave me a space to then, go over not even just grief stuff, but other stuff that would have been contributing to that, or just everything in life that was piling or making life more difficult or harder. And it just gave me a place to be able to talk about that. And I found it brilliant. I loved it. I was so pleased I did it. And the only reason I stopped was because she went on to maternity leave. So I didn't have a choice, but that's, where luckily time coincided with you, because then obviously the hypnotherapy linked up completely at that time, which was lovely. And it came at the perfect time. And I did go back to her when she came back off maternity, because frustratingly, she went on to maternity leave on my birthday in October. But, my dad got poorly. He was diagnosed in the September and died in the January. He started to get poorly in the August, but the diagnosis came in the September. So for me, September, October, November, December, January are the 4 months that the worst of everything happened. And obviously, frustratingly, she went on to maternity leave right over those months. And I was so worried that I didn't have that. Obviously the hypnotherapy worked out perfectly timing wise, but I did go back to her when she came back in the February, and because I felt like I hadn't resolved, I hadn't
it's like
got
unfinished
closure.
business. And
I just felt, I said to Luke, I was like, I don't know what is going to happen when I go back, because I know I'm in a better place now because of the hypnotherapy, but I feel like I can't just leave it where I was. I need to go back to her. So he was like, no, that's fine. So I did. I went back for, I think it was only 2 or 3 more sessions. And I said to her, I think I'm okay. I think I'm okay to stop for a while now. And she was like, that's fine. My door's always open if you ever feel like you need to come back. So obviously, and I haven't felt the need to go back since. A lot of people have always have asked me, because I didn't tell anyone about the counselling. I kept that very, very private. I didn't tell anyone. I talk about it a little bit more now if people ask me, but I didn't tell anyone. I kept that.
What was the reason for that?
I don't know. I'm not sure, to be honest. It's not even that I felt a certain way towards it, because I think counselling is fantastic. And I would advocate anyone now to do it. I think everyone in life needs therapy. There's not one person that wouldn't benefit from therapy in any way, shape, or form. And I would advocate for it continuously. But I think the thing is, at that time, I was masking so well that no one really knew just how bad I was. I don't even know if Luke really to this day even knows how bad it. I've told him a few things since, some crazy thoughts and notions that I had in my head during that time,
Yeah.
but I mask so well. And even my office, who see me every single day,
Yeah.
probably see me more than anyone else in my life. Even they said, we can't believe that that's because, I've spoken to them since about how I was feeling during that time. And even they say they can't believe that that's how I was feeling, because I
Mm.
didn't display that at work at all. And I said, no, but I think that's why I was so bad outside of work, because I hid it so well inside work.
We're going to wrap it up in a minute, Charlie. One question. You don't have to answer this. It
Yeah.
might be quite emotional. What do you think your dad would say to you now, where you are at the moment?
Oh, he'd be so pleased. He'd be so, so pleased. I think, especially with work, Dad's always been my person that I've looked up to from a work point of view. My dad was so successful at work, so immensely successful, and he was full of so amazingly, and his funeral showed that. And I really like to think that we're in Dad was in the prison service, I'm in the prison service, two very different walks of life within the prison service, but I like to think that he'd be so pleased with how I do at work, because I use him as my base of my motivation all the time, and how I am as a person, and my work ethic comes directly from him. And I think he'd be so pleased that, when I got my promotion, when I became a manager, I'd been temporarily promoted for, about 2.5, 3 years before that. But, the night before my interview, he was the person I was on the phone to. When I got the job, he was the first person I called. I got in the car and he was the first person I called when I got the job. And he was so, so pleased. So I think, you know, I like to think I've got quite a good reputation at work, and, a lot of that has come from the basis of him. He set the groundwork, and I've, built on top of that. And a lot, everything work ethic wise comes from him. And I'd like to think that he'd be so pleased with how everything's going. I'm very lucky that Stephen's doing so well at school. He loves school, and Dad would be so pleased with that. Stephen started rugby, and Dad would love that. And yeah, he'd be so pleased with everything, and he'd be so pleased to see, how much happier I am in myself, because he would have always wanted that for me as well. He would have loved to have seen me like doing all the gym stuff, because Dad always looked after himself. And when I was trying to get into the police before I went into the prison service, Dad was the one out on the running track running bleep tests with me, trying to get me through it. Dad was always the one trying to help me with those sort of things. Dad was the one that, before I applied for anything, I always ran it past him. That's what I struggle with now, is I never know what to look for as my next step, because I haven't got the person who I need to talk to about it. But Dad was always my biggest cheerleader for things. If it wasn't the right decision, he would tell me. So yeah, it's hard to think about making those decisions without having that person to run it past. But yeah, he'd be so pleased with where I'm at now.
Last question, Charlie.
Yeah.
One I always ask. Is there anything that you're taking away from this conversation? Anything that's kind of stuck out to you at all?
I think, like, how much I've grown as a person, like reflecting back on, who I was at the beginning of, mine and Luke's relationship, and I look at that teenager that I was then, and the person I am now, and how much more sure of myself that I am. How much more I advocate for myself now, but also how much I'm not pushed around now as much. I think, I'm so much more of a stronger person than I ever used to be. I certainly don't take as much rubbish as I used to. Um, and I think, when you're with someone who's quite a strong character like Luke, you need to be like that.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased that the person I now am, that I have the ability to be confident and sure of myself and be able to communicate that better.
Yeah. It's been really nice to see that kind of transformation in you over the last year or so.
Yeah.
I know you were very good at masking and stuff before, and we probably didn't.
Ultimate masker.
Yeah, we probably didn't know maybe the real you then, but obviously, seeing the growth that you've had in the last year it's been inspiring.
Yes.
So be proud of yourself.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna get you back on with Luke at some point. I think that'd be a good. If you're
Couples
up for that.
therapy.
That'd be interesting. See what he's got to say.
It certainly would be, yeah.
But no, thank you very much for
you.
chatting. And bye. Thanks for listening to Between the Roles with me, Michael Blown. If you've got any thoughts, feedback, or questions about today's episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me by email at loquicounselling@outlook.com. That's LOQUI counselling@outlook.com. Or through my website, www.loquicounselling.co.uk, or on social media at Loqui Counselling and Hypnotherapy. If you've enjoyed the conversation, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might relate. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time on Between the Roles.